All right, let's talk about how massive multi-million-dollar contracts are actually awarded. It's a super common misconception that winning a huge contract is just about throwing out the absolute lowest number, crossing your fingers, and hoping for the best. But in reality, it is nothing like that. It's actually this rigorous, incredibly specific mathematical gauntlet of elimination. So today, in this explainer, we're going to completely decode the criteria and procedures used to evaluate these bids. We're going to see exactly how raw numbers are scrutinized, adjusted, and ultimately put through a fascinating mathematical formula to crown a winner.
Think of this as the life cycle of a bid. We're going to map out the journey through 4 distinct phases. 1. Evaluating the raw bids. 2. The 30% rule. 3. Finding the average price. And finally, 4. Breaking the ties. Okay, let's dive into this, starting with step 1, evaluating the raw bids.
When a giant stack of bids first lands on an employer's desk, they are definitely not ready for an apples-to-apples comparison. That raw data has to be cleaned up. So to get every single bidder onto the exact same baseline, the employer runs through 5 fundamental steps. First up, establishing the core bid price. This specifically excludes value-added tax and provisional sums in the summary bill of quantities, but it crucially includes day work items, assuming they're priced competitively. Second, they go through and correct any arithmetic errors. A simple misplaced decimal point won't necessarily disqualify you, but it's absolutely going to get mathematically corrected. Third, they apply any adjustments for discounts that were officially offered in the letter of bid. Fourth, adjustments are made for any nonconformities. We have to make sure everyone is being judged on identical deliverables. And lastly, they apply all the specific evaluation factors and eligibility criteria required for that particular project. Only after these 5 meticulous adjustments do we actually have our true evaluated bid prices.
Which brings us to phase 2, the 30% rule.
Now that we have our leveled out numbers, the bids enter the first major dramatic beat of the gauntlet. Honestly, I kind of think of this phase as a massive trapdoor. Here's the rule. The employer compares the evaluated bid price against their own internal cost estimate for the project. And if an evaluated bid is more than 30% below that cost estimate, it is instantly rejected. The rules classify a bid that drops past this severe 30% threshold as non-responsive, and there is no coming back from it. You could have the most beautifully formatted, genius proposal in the world, but if your price undercuts the estimate by more than 30%, boom, you fall right through the trapdoor and you're eliminated.
Survive that, and you make it to the climax. Part 3, finding the average price. For the bids that actually survive that 30% trapdoor, the ones officially deemed substantially responsive, we move to the most critical phase where the winner is determined. So the crucial point is right here, the average bid price method. The rules state that the employer determines the average bid price of all the substantially responsive bids, and then the contract is awarded to the bid price which is closest to that average. Just think about how completely this flips the script. Your goal isn't actually to be the absolute cheapest bidder in the room. The goal is to be the closest to the middle of the pack.
Let's picture a very clear mathematical example derived right from these rules. Imagine we have 3 surviving, substantially responsive bids competing for a contract. Bid A comes in at $90. Bid B comes in at $100. Bid C comes in at $140. Now, if this were a traditional race to the bottom, bid A would already be popping the champagne, right? But under the average bid price method, we have to do the math first.
Let's calculate the average of all 3. 90 plus 100 plus 140 gives us 330. Divide that by 3, and our average bid price is exactly $110. Next, the employer looks at the distance of each individual bid from that $110 average. Bid A at $90 is $20 away. Bid C at $140 is $30 away. But bid B, sitting pretty at $100, is only $10 away from the average. Because bid B is the closest to the average bid price, they are officially selected for the contract. Bid A, despite being the absolute cheapest option, loses out because they were just too far below the collective average.
But hey, as anyone who works with numbers will tell you, whenever you introduce averages and distances, you introduce the very real possibility of a perfect tie. So what happens if 2 competing bidders mirror each other perfectly? What if one bid is exactly $10 above the average and another bid is exactly $10 below the average? They are mathematically equidistant. Who wins then?
Let's move to our final phase and see how this builds into part 4, breaking the ties.
This brings us to a strict set of logical fallback rules designed specifically to break a mathematical gridlock. And the protocol for an equidistant tie is actually brilliantly simple. The rule states, in case two or more bid prices are determined to be equally closest to the average bid price, the bid price which is below the average bid price shall be selected. So, if we have that tie where one is 10 above and one is 10 below, the system ultimately favors the lower number. The bidder whose price sits just under the average takes the victory.
But we really have to push this scenario to the absolute extreme. What if the final, adjusted bid prices are completely, perfectly equal? Say two competitors submit a bid of exactly $100. They are obviously the exact same distance from the average because they are the exact same number. It's a true, undeniable tie down to the penny.
Now, what's really interesting about how they solve this is just how old school it gets. When the math entirely runs out, the final ultimate tiebreaker is a highly official in-person drawing of lots. The protocol here is remarkably specific. First, the employer has to notify the concerned bidders of the date, time, and place in writing. Second, those bidders' designated representatives must show up to the event in person. Third, right there in the room, they select the winning bid by literally drawing lots. And finally, the representatives present are formally required to sign a record proving their attendance, which seals the results of the draw. It is a wildly dramatic, bureaucratic finale to a highly mathematical process.
And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the whole philosophy behind these rules. This bidding gauntlet isn't just a bunch of bureaucratic red tape. It's a system purpose-built to ensure total fairness. By correcting errors, establishing identical baselines, rejecting those bids that drop 30% below estimates, and then aiming for the mathematical center, the process systematically strips away the extreme outliers. It fundamentally protects the employer from dangerously low-quality bids and guarantees the most balanced, reliable price the market can offer.
So I want to leave you with this thought as we wrap up our explainer today. If you're a company preparing a multi-million-dollar proposal, and you know the exact rules of this mathematical game, if you know for a fact that winning means aiming for the collective average rather than just racing to the bottom, how does that completely change the psychology of pricing your bid? You aren't just crunching your own numbers anymore, you're literally trying to read the minds of every other competitor in the room. And that, for sure, is the true hidden genius behind the mathematics of winning a bid.